everybody. Welcome back. And right now I'm with my next guest. He wrote this book. It's called Patience with God. Please welcome Frank Schaeffer. Frank.
Thanks.
Welcome, buddy.
Thanks, buddy.
Now, if somebody sees this book in the store, Patience with God, they might think it's a religious book. And what's it all about, Frank?
Well, the subtitle kind of sums part of it up anyway. Faith for people who don't like religion or atheism. And essentially what it's a book written to are people who have been through either religious or secular experiences, have come out the other side thinking that they want to think things through for themselves, but they're not ready to join what's known as this group of new atheists like Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris, these guys who have been writing very anti-religious books. On the other hand, maybe they're from backgrounds like I came from. I had a fundamentalist minister for a father and kind of grew beyond that and away from it and away from my Protestant evangelical background, but wasn't ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and so still look at religion and faith as something very important in my life. But on the other hand, I'm very dissatisfied with the kind of way that religion and politics, for instance, in the religious right in this country, came together. And I'm not ready to jump ship and become an atheist either. In my particular case, I go to a Greek Orthodox church, which is a long way from where I grew up as an evangelical. But that's not what this book is about. It's not trying to get people to become any one thing. It's to get people to stand back and just say, we are spiritual creatures whether we like it or not. Whatever religion we are, we may be in mechanical, biological bodies, but we're looking at the world, looking for meaning, for a depth of relationship with people. And most of us have a feeling that there's more to life than simply meets the eye. And for people like that, Patience with God is a book that I think holds out some hope that maybe they're not crazy for believing on one hand, and then to atheists, take another look at what perhaps they've rejected a little too quickly.
Now, you have an interesting perspective here because your father was a minister, but you also know and have been around some of the big names in the ministry.
Yeah. Well, for folks who have who know the Schaeffer name, back in the 70s and 80s in the evangelical subculture, which doesn't mean everybody knows these people, but if you were in that subculture, you would know the name Francis Schaeffer. In fact, you'd know my mom's name, Edith Schaeffer. They started a community called Le Brie Fellowship in Switzerland, of all places, though they were Americans. That's where I grew up. And in the late 60s, early 70s, and into the mid-80s, my dad became very well known as one of the leaders and founders of the religious right. And as his kind of nepotistic sidekick, as happens in a lot of evangelical groups, you know, fathers and daughters, husbands, wives, cousins, anybody who can get in on the act follows along for a while. But in '84, when my dad died, about a year later after that, I kind of reconsidered what I was doing, and I just could not see continuing down a path as a religious right voice in something that I increasingly did not agree or believe. And for me, that was also a political step. And it just occurred to me a lot of the folks on the religious right really hate this country. They would like to see it fail, very much like Rush Limbaugh with Barack Obama today, because from their point of view, you know, they're waiting for Jesus to come back on one side, and so they're kind of rooting for the apocalypse. They don't like peace talks in Israel because the worse it gets, better it is for their prospects in terms of their interpretation of prophecy, which is something I talk about in the book and criticize. And then on the other hand, you know, if you weren't voting for Republicans and you weren't voting on the hard right, sort of the Sarah Palin wing of the Republican Party, at some point you were judged not to be a, quote, Christian. Now, of course, that didn't include a lot of Orthodox or Roman Catholics or progressive Christians in the Protestant wing of various churches, but this is how it came to be viewed. And so that's what I escaped. So really, Patience for God talks about two things. It's a critique of the new atheist movement, on one hand. It's also a critique of fundamentalism, and I kind of see them as one and the same, because each is about ready to ram what they believe down your throat as absolutely certain. And in a way, I'm kind of pleading for uncertainty, and I'm also talking about the fact that that essentially there are things we can't know, and so that's where faith and trust comes in. And you know, you don't write off people who disagree with you on one hand, you embrace them, and on the other hand, there is such a thing called mystery in life, and essentially when it comes to spirituality, that's pretty much where it has to stay, I think.
Now, but you talk about both sides, and they are clashing here. Now, let me ask you, you became Greek Orthodox, but is this because your wife is Greek? What happened there?
Well, about 25 years ago, after I got out of the evangelical culture, you know, I was raised to go to church on Sundays. You know, people say, oh, what do you believe? And to be honest about it, it's hard to say what you believe in terms of, oh, I chose this, or what you were raised to do. So I was raised to feel guilty if you're not in church, and I was raised with the idea that a Christian life was a fulfilling one. And I left some of that behind me, but I didn't leave the need for community, for fellowship, for communion with God at some point out of my life altogether. And I began, through a friend of mine, to go to a Greek Orthodox church up in Newburyport, Massachusetts, where I live, and really liked it. I like the liturgy. I like the fact that it's connected to the historic church and isn't something that some preacher just made up Friday night to preach on the next morning, that you can count on the liturgy. And I just found it very sustaining. Doesn't mean I think anybody else has to do this. It just happens to be where I took refuge from my past, very different than the way I grew up. And it fits in very well with what I'm saying in this book, because it takes a more mystical approach. It's not proselytizing. Nobody's out trying to make anybody convert or do anything different. And its view of the church and who's saved, who's lost, isn't this kind of black and white, born-again experience, you're in or out, more of a journey. People are at various steps on that path, and that fits my temperament.
What do you think about the Greek food? Because that's
the Greek food's good.
Favorite part of the
well, then you're asking for the real reason I go to the Greek Orthodox Church.
It's the festivals.
It's the festival.
The food, you got the wine.
That's right.
Listen, Frank, I want to thank you for coming down. His book is Patience with God. This was Frank Schaeffer. We'll be right back.
Thanks a lot.
Right after this. Thanks, Frank. Good stuff.